I decided to do my curriculum project on teaching rounding. As I was looking at the third and fourth grade Common Core standards and trying to determine what I had been using in my curriculum versus what Common Core was requiring and looking to see what the holes were, I noticed that a lot of times when I was teaching math, I was teaching algorithms, so the kids would know the process to working a concept in math, but they didn't always have a good understanding of the concept. And if we all think about math, we all know that the more you understand something and the deeper you understand a math concept, the more you'll be able to use it as you go along in school, so the greater your math potential will be. Of course, a lot of times in resource we are limited by time, and I know that's not just resource, that's every classroom. But I wanted to look at some ways to increase students' understanding of rounding, exactly what it means to round, not just the algorithm, but what does it mean to round? What are you actually doing? And what's the use of it? What's the point in doing that? My background is in teaching students with learning disabilities, so I'm kind of coming at it that way, but also realizing that kids with learning disabilities a lot of times aren't pulled out to a resource classroom anymore. It's more of an inclusion model. So looking at how kids with learning disabilities can be taught to understanding in a classroom with the kids that don't have learning disabilities. So what do I want students to understand about rounding? Well, when students in the third grade are rounding to the nearest 10 or 100, I want them to understand that they are trying to decide which 10 or 100 a number is closest to. When I was looking at the Common Core standards, that was the emphasis, was tens and hundreds. So when teaching students with learning disabilities, there is really strong support in using direct instruction. But again, if they're in a class with other kids that don't have learning disabilities, those kids need more of an inquiry-based instructional approach where it's more student-led and the students are generating knowledge, bouncing ideas off of each other. So in the direct instruction, it's teacher-generated, and the inquiry-based is student-generated, and so I wanted to look to see if there's any way those two could be combined so that kids with learning disabilities and regular ed kids are both benefiting from lessons on rounding. Again, just talking about the inquiry-based versus direct instruction, and a lot of kids are kind of caught in the crossfires of those math wars, which one's best. In 2008, the National Mathematics Advisory Panel did recommend a combined approach, so not only direct instruction but inquiry-based as well, and that's for all students, including kids with learning disabilities. So teachers are going to have to figure out how to balance the inquiry-based and the direct instruction so that kids are learning math with deep understanding and not just surface-level algorithms. So scaffolding is a direct instruction approach. And in scaffolding, basically, you are using background knowledge to create new knowledge. So when you're teaching rounding to promote understanding, you can divide students into small groups, and the students can then think of as many skills that are involved as estimation as they can. And here I'm assuming that they've already learned estimation before rounding. So once the kids think of all the skills that they need for estimating, then they can think of real-world applications for those skills. And that would be the inquiry-based part of the lesson. The kids are working with each other, they're talking, they're discussing math, they're coming up with new ways of using the skills that they already know. And then for the direct instruction part, the teacher can call all the kids back together and then formally introduce rounding. So the kids' activity with the inquiry-based instruction is going to prime their background knowledge of estimation, and then the teacher would build upon or scaffold the new information about rounding. Another way that you can use direct instruction is through a strategy called concrete representational abstract. And in this strategy, children work with concrete manipulatives first, and then they move to representations or pictures of concrete objects, and then abstract, which is a symbol such as a number. And this is very common in direct instruction. Kids a lot of times will recall using the concrete manipulatives when they're doing their homework or taking tests, and that really helps them to come up with correct solutions to math problems on tests and during homework. So usually, again, you start with using the concrete object, and then once the kids understand the concrete object, then they would move to using the representational and then to symbols. So let's see. If you wanted to use the CRA approach to teaching rounding and combining the inquiry base with the direct instruction, you can use a number line and have the children write the numbers 1 through 10 on the number line, with the halfway point, of course, being 5. And then the kids can place a button or some other little manipulative on each number that you call out and determine which half of the 10 the button is. Is it closer to the 0 or is it closer to the 10? And then after that, you could use a direct instruction lesson on finding the halfway point between two numbers on a number line using the X's, which would be representational, instead of buttons. And then they can use inquiry-based instruction to determine how to find the halfway point between two tens or two hundreds using only numbers, and that's where the abstract part would come in. And if you would, pause here and then play the demonstration, and I'll demonstrate direct instruction with finding the halfway point between two numbers. Okay, another direct instruction approach is peer-mediated instruction, and this is when basically you have kids working together in pairs. In peer-mediated instruction, usually the class is divided into half based on ability level, and the top person in the top half would be paired with the top person in the bottom half, and so forth. Also, it's also important to note that both partners are actively engaged in instruction at some point in the lesson. So it's not just the more advanced child teaching the younger child. Both students are involved in teaching and both students are involved in learning. This is a great approach. I know a lot of my kids with learning disabilities, I'd go into the regular class to help them and assist them, and they would not be paying any attention at all. And I like this approach because kids are engaged the entire time. You know, if they're working with a partner, they're generally going to be paying more attention than if there's a teacher in the front of the room and they're in the back of the room playing with an eraser on their desk or something like that. So when using peer-mediated instruction to talk about rounding, we can talk about why it's important to know how to put numbers in order when rounding, and then also to develop the skill of putting the numbers in order. First student in the pair could use inquiry-based, and maybe the kid that's a little bit more advanced academically could conduct the inquiry-based portion of the lesson. They can connect the importance of putting numbers in order with the recent lessons from estimation, since that's something they probably would have just done. They can use that background knowledge to talk about why it's important to put numbers in order. And then the second student could be the one to do the direct instruction approach, and that student would teach exactly how to put numbers in order. They would provide the guided practice for that, independent practice, and then after independent practice, it'd be important for the students to come back together to discuss their answers and then also check their answers as well, because we want to make sure that the kids are understanding and not getting incorrect answers. And then discussing math is my last category, and it's not necessarily a direct instruction strategy, but research does show that when students discuss math with peers as well as with their teachers, it helps them to develop a deep understanding of a math concept. So basically the benefit of discussing with a teacher is they do get immediate corrective feedback rather than waiting for homework or waiting for a test. When kids are talking about math with a teacher, they have opportunity for immediate corrective feedback. Also, they have an opportunity to develop more than one solution to a problem when they're working with other kids. They can also listen to other people's ideas concerning how to work problem-solving methods. So combining direct instruction and inquiry-based instruction can provide a really good avenue for meaningful discussions about math for all students. So kids with learning disabilities benefit from discussing math as well as regular ed kids. And that's all I have. Hopefully we're well connected and we can have questions.